and a special welcome to members of the Muslim community that are here tonight. So we say to you, Baruchim Habayim, Marhaban, Masal Khir, welcome. We're delighted that you could join us tonight. And a special welcome to Imam Abdullah Antepli from Duke University. I have to tell you, I'm very inspired by the makeup of the attendance this evening. So many of the younger members of our congregation are here tonight, and that certainly indicates that there's a desire to begin a dialogue. There are a small group of people who really didn't want this event to happen. They view a dialogue with a Muslim cleric as a betrayal of our loyalty to our people and to the land of Israel. They believe that you cannot trust any Muslim, and that even engaging one so that we may know better on what we agree, on what we disagree, is a bad idea. They point to all the death and suffering that has occurred in the world in our own lifetimes at the hands of people who act in the name of Allah and His Prophet. They surmise, therefore, that Islam is fundamentally incorrigible beyond hope, and therefore we're just wasting our breath. Here's why I disagree. First of all, if you go back far enough, we're family, we're mishpacha. According to our Talmudic tradition, the Islamic faith descends from Abraham's son Yishmael. In fact, one of the major differences in our historical theologies is that whereas the Bible states that Isaac, Yitzchak, was Abraham's chosen son, Muslims believe that Ishmael was the chosen son. But even according to the Judeo-Christian account that is found in the Bible, in the Torah, that Ishmael was sent out of Abraham's house with his mother Hagar, there is a midrashic tradition that Abraham maintained a very close and loving relationship with his firstborn son Ishmael. No father who is a compassionate person like Abraham can ever turn his back on his son. And therefore the Medrash quotes the words of the Psalms of the Tehillim, Kirachem av al banim. Just like a father has compassion upon his son, so does God have compassion upon his people. And certainly Abraham was a father, Ishmael was a son. And Abraham loved Ishmael just like any father loves the son. And so we too, the heirs of Abraham, our father, should not coldly turn our backs to the heirs of Ishmael. Secondly, Muslims are not a monolithic group, just like Jews are not a monolithic group. We sometimes lose sight of that fact when we look from the outside.
And they disagree worse than the Jews.
As you'll see shortly. It's true that there are Islamists who are extremists and believe that jihad means killing your enemies and committing acts of terror. But this is not representative of an entire faith, of over 1.5 billion people across the world. I want to remind everyone that 500 years ago, when Christianity was about the same age that Islam is today, Christians were murdering Jews right and left in pogroms and inquisitions in the name of their Lord. But as times changed and as society evolved, most Christians realized that this was not the way. We are witnessing this evolution taking place in the Islamic world in our lifetimes, a reform of sorts to adapt and more align with Western democracy. But the fact that most terrorism today emerges from the Islamic world is not something that we should sweep under the carpet either. But if we don't engage in discussion, then we're not helping to help advance the cause of a more moderate Islam, which is desired and promulgated by so many. People also forget that before 1948 and the founding of the State of Israel, Sephardic Jews lived by and large very peacefully in Muslim countries. Talk to a Moroccan Jew today, and he or she will tell you about the great love they have for King Mohammed VI and other benevolent rulers in Morocco. In the backdrop of history, Jews have fared better under Yishmael's rule than under Esav's rule. Finally, to ignore the Muslims in our own GTA community is in my opinion, very counterproductive. You see them everywhere you go. You interact with them everywhere you go. There are now an estimated 750,000 Muslims in the GTA versus 200,000 Jews. We all interact with Muslims on a daily basis, in the store, on the street, in the doctor's office, and at work. So there's a major disconnect, I think, with some people in the Jewish community. The Muslims that I know and that I work with, those are the okay Muslims. But everyone else, maybe not so good. I don't think so. If we're going to create a more civil and peaceful society, we need to learn to get to know each other and to begin the dialogue. Let's at least understand where we stand, if only to reaffirm our convictions. And who knows, you might even be surprised by some of the things you're going to hear tonight. Please understand, as I stated over Shabbos during my sermon, that this is not intended as a kumbaya moment. We're not here to lock hands and say we are the world. When I hand over the microphone to Imam Antepli in just a moment, I'm going to ask him to tell you, in his own words, why he wanted to come here tonight. Why he, through my dear and very wise friend, Rabbi John Moskowitz of Holy Blossom Temple, requested to have this meeting at our shul. He wanted to meet an Orthodox Jewish community. He knows that our community is hardcore Orthodox and hardcore Zionist. He's coming into the proverbial lion's den in order to hear from us and to exchange ideas. The very purpose of his organization, which you're going to hear about in a moment, Muslim Leadership Initiative, is to present to the Muslim community the Jewish narrative. Since so many Muslims have such misperceptions and mistaken stereotypes about Jews and can't understand where we're coming from when we defend Israel passionately and condemn Palestinian aggression. He's here to listen as much as he's here to talk. We'll hear Imam Antepli's opening comments, and then we'll sit down, he and I will sit down over a glass of water. We actually had dinner together before at Monolithic. And we're going to exchange some ideas. This will be followed by some Q&A, which we're going to leave ample room for, from you, from the people in this audience. In order to maintain decorum, we have index cards and pens that are in the back. They are on this table right over here where Mr. Genisov is seated. And at any time over the course of the evening, please feel free to go over to the table, pick up some index cards for yourself and the people around you, write down your question, and all we ask is that not only do you write down your question, but also write down your age demographic, your age bracket, your religion, and anything else you'd like to write about yourself so we have some perspective as to where your question is coming from. And then please put it in the box, and we'll periodically get fed some of these cards, and I'll be asking the questions of the Imam. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce my new friend, Imam Abdullah Antepli. He is a true mensch, and I'm proud to call him.
Yeah, you see rabbis and imams hugging each other, singing Hina Matovu Manayim every day. I know it's kind of boring. Good evening, Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. It's really truly an honor, a distinct pleasure to be in this house of God, and also had the opportunity to daven upstairs in your beautiful sanctuary. It's really truly an honor and pleasure. Why I am here is not a pleasant topic. Why I'm here? Because we are not doing well. As the children of Israel and children of Ishmael we are not doing well. But I am absolutely determined not to make this current unimpressive, somewhat pathetic and depressive state of Jews and Muslims to be the defining future of our children. It was the Torah portion a couple of months ago in the synagogues when you were studying Exodus, when God tells Moses, tell the children of Israel to bring me some new gifts. Tell the children of Israel to collect me some new gifts. And that verse also identically exists in the Muslim tradition as well. Bringing God a gift. What would a gift to God would look like? What would make Hashem smile? What would the divine mercy and compassion be filled with delight? I think we saw one of those such gifts in the 20th century. In the 20th century, many of whom were involved, the Christians and Jews of the 20th century, by reconciling Christian-Jewish relationship, by reconciling Christianity and Judaism, by through incredibly amazing and remarkable way, in one person's generation, we moved from a shameful, disgusting, despicable Holocaust, where 6 million innocent people were killed, not for nothing that they have done, but because they were innocent Jews. From there, we moved to a beloved minority status for Jewish community, mostly in the West. I know anti-Semitism is not defeated, but where we came from, where we were 60, 70 years ago, this is incredible. This is more than Dayenu. This is amazing. I think this could make Hashem smile. We are 2,000 years of every Sunday cursing, using religious language in hate, inspiring and putting the seeds of violence into the hearts and minds of many Christians over and over. It has been tamed, it has been contained. I think Christians and Jews of the 20th century who worked towards this reconciliation, who didn't listen to the naysayers, who didn't hold on to the previous grudges of violence, death, and destruction, worked tirelessly to defeat Christian anti-Semitism and improve Christian-Jewish relationship, they made God smile. They presented a gift to God. And in the 21st century Jews and Muslims, we have a similar opportunity to give God Almighty another gift, to make Hashem smile in a similar way, by reconciling Judaism and Islam, by reconciling Jews and Muslims, improving Jewish-Muslim relationship. To me, it's really not even an option. The voice from Sinai to my Muslim ears is very, very clear. There is a moral imperative for the 21st century Muslims and Jews to deliver the similar gift, to the similar gift to the divine Almighty. And if that's a moral commitment to the 21st century Jews and Muslims, I think the Jews and Muslims in North America, our moral imperative and responsibility is much, much stronger. Jews and Muslims living in Canada and the United States, our moral responsibility in shaping, in working towards, in developing that gift, improving and building bridges between Jewish and Muslim communities, our moral responsibility is much higher. Why? Because in this part of the world, it's possible. It's possible that we can have these conversations. It's possible that Jews and Muslims, against all odds, I am not naive, I am not peacenik either. The reason I wanted to meet this particular community is because the kind of communities that we are meeting is not necessarily the most helpful conversation partner so far in making this gift, with all due respect to them. So when it is possible, when it is commanded by God, where it is possible in North America, against all odds, against all difficulties, let's make this gift together as Canadian Muslims, American Muslims, and Canadian Jews and Canadian Muslims, inshallah, Be'ezrat Hashem, as we say. So I am looking forward to engaging your questions, and I am acutely aware of the kind of challenges that Jews and Muslims faces today, and I am really hoping and looking forward to answering any and every question that you might have. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Okay, thank you so much, Imam. Okay, I'd like to get the conversation started, and I want people, I know that this is a new experience for so many of us. I'd like to recognize Imam Ibrahim, who's here as well. Thank you very much for being here.
And Burl Adler is here.
And Burl Nadler is here from CJA. We thank you for being here as well. We had a wonderful meeting yesterday of some of the ecumenical leaders. And oh, Mohammed, I didn't see you. I'm sorry. Mohammed, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Okay. As I mentioned to you yesterday, Imam, the number one issue that we get, and first of all, I don't know where you want to get started. We can either get started with the elephant in the room, which is Israel, or we can start with Islam in general around the world.
Let's ask the audience. Which one wants to start with Israel?
ISIS.
Sure.
And who wants to start with Islam in general? Okay, very good.
It's a very democratic process, so. But no Jewish-Muslim relationship or no Jewish-Muslim conversation is fruitful, fulfilled, and honest if you don't talk about Israel.
Exactly.
And if you don't bring Israel on the table and see some of the challenges around, because that's where things fall apart.
Right.
I am really tired of those Jewish-Muslim conversations. People come together and eat hummus and talk about halal chicken, kosher chicken. I am done with those kind of conversations. There's nothing wrong with kosher chicken. I just had kosher lamb chops. It's amazing. And as far as I'm concerned, my evening reward is dayenu. It's all done. Everything else will be a bonus.
We're going to make you work for yourself. Okay. So the number one issue that people have said, you've got to ask the Imam, and that people don't understand, they feel that there's a disconnect. We need people, gentlemen like yourself, who put a beautiful face to Islam. And there seems to be a disconnect with what we're seeing in the media of another form of Islam that we understand is not representative of you. ISIS is not representative of you. Terrorism, suicide bombings is not representative of you. So you have our full confidence that you know that you don't have an explosive belt strapped to yourself. But here's the problem that so many people in our community have. The question is, we're not hearing it, and I'm not sure if and that's what we need confirmation from you. We're not hearing the condemnation and the distancing between what we would call radical Islam or Islamism and mainstream Islam. And I was wondering if you could open up with addressing
Absolutely.
that.
You are asking the $1 million question the first. Where are the moderate Muslims? Where are the reasonable, peaceful Muslims when there is so much evil things, barbaric things, evil people like Osama bin Laden, like ISIS, many terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, doing evil things in the name of Islam, beheadings, rape, killing, etc. Where are the moderate Muslims? Why so many regular Canadians and Americans, they don't hear the condemnation and the cry and the distancing from this barbarism, seemingly? There are two possible answers for this question. There are two possible answers. There is no third answer. One answer is 1.6 billion people who see this barbarism and evil business in the name of Islam, and at its worst, they actually support this, they encourage this, they basically endorse this, or at its best, somehow they don't care or they don't say anything about this. This is one possible answer. The second, the Muslim community who are the main target of Islamic terrorism and Muslim extremism. 99.9% of the victims of the Muslim terror, it kills Muslims first. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, all these evil organizations claiming and doing this evil business in the name of Islam, they kill more Muslims than anybody else. So the fact that Muslims are the primary victims of this cancer, this evil, despicable reality, religious extremism, the first answer is either they accept this somehow or they are silent about it, or secondly, they are doing everything they can. There's a room for improvement for their ability to explain and express their dismay and also explain the real mainstream theology and practice of Islam. But for some reason, A, they don't do a better enough job, they don't do good enough of a job. Secondly, the existing good job that they do, the kind of loud condemnation that they make, the loud distancing, outrage that they make in the face of this barbarism isn't coming to you. Because communication goes both ways. I can condemn I can condemn Islamic terrorism or Muslim extremism or what these evil organizations doing until my face turned blue. But if your sources of information, if your sources of communication is not covering my voice, if somehow my voice is not included in the information that you receive and look at the world, unfortunately you will not hear me.
So if I can interrupt for a second, that's really part of the question. How many of you, percentage-wise, are there versus, is your voice representative of a majority, of a minority, of a significant percentage?
I dare say, both Imam Hindi and myself, we represent the overwhelming majority of the Muslim community. I dare say it. But unfortunately, as I said, the communication from our ability to say what needs to be said, to say it in such a sophisticated way, especially in the United States and Canada, especially built the kind of beautiful institutions that Jewish community have built here. We are a new community. Part of the wrong assumption is the Jewish community look at themselves. When there is a violence committed in the name of Judaism, or if a Jewish person, like Baruch Goldstein in 1994, Baruch Goldstein, an American doctor who made Aliyah in Hebron, who killed so many innocent Muslims while they were praying, admirably, praiseworthily, the many of the Jewish community was in the forefront condemning this violence. Why the Jewish community is, Baruch Hashem, as we say, Alhamdulillah, so well organized, so well established, they built the mechanism of communication. We are not there as a community. I'm not really not trying to shy away the problem, but we will get there. We will get there. And since 9/11, the American Muslim community, North American Muslim communities, they have matured significantly. I think we came a long way in our ability to call this evil cancer, destroying the world of Islam, hijacking our religion, and creating death and destruction to many Muslims and others, and destroying Muslim societies. We made a lot of progress. But I don't think we made an equal amount of progress for non-Muslim community to basically go beyond the usual communication circles, go beyond the media, mainstream media, go one extra mile and say, why am I not hearing the Muslim voice? Why am I, if this voice exists, where can I look? And I didn't find. I asked this question to a lot of my non-Muslim brothers and sisters. Where did you look? What Imam do you know? Who Muslim you have visited? Which mosque that you have seen or attended to that you didn't hear their voice? Most of the time, those efforts are not there, unfortunately. If I kick Rabbi Daniel, we will both be on the New York Times tomorrow. But the fact that we are actually doing God's work, trying to make Hashem smile, by trying to create bridges between our communities, it is such a no sell for the media. No sell for the sensationalist media that these efforts will not take. So for those who are looking for moderate Muslim voice, who are crying, condemning, and not only crying and condemning, I put my children every night after reading parts of Quran to my daughter and son, and I spent pro bono labor of love with the help of FBI, spending hours in the evening going to those online resources where these evil people are spreading their evil theology, day and night for hours, trying to undermine the religious, scriptural, and the theological traditional roots of extremism and the terrorism in those areas. Not only condemning, but actively many of us, many of my colleagues, like Imam Hindi, like Brother Muhammad here, many of us are, forget about, talk is cheap. Forget about condemning. Many of us are working daily because it's primarily destroying us, our religion, primarily suffocating us even in the United States. Every morning we wake up for a reality 7 hours, 8 hours ahead of us. Some evil organization or people did evil things in the name of Islam that's going to affect the reality. It's going to affect my decision whether I'm going to send my children to school or not. That's the breakfast conversation with my wife every morning. Is it safe enough to send my daughter and son to school? Because 2 years ago, 2 miles from my house, 3 Muslims were killed in an execution style. The fact that I am basically crying for a little bit of this question, it's a very legitimate question. If you don't hear the voice of Muslim, it's a very legitimate question. If you see these evil people doing evil things in the name of Islam, it's very legitimate to have that kind of
outrage and frustration. But we can do and we should do better as Muslims. That's why I am here. Otherwise, your source of information will not cover my voice. That's why I have to go. I travel 200 days a year, and I'm still married. Go figure.
Sometimes that's the key. Yeah. All right, so
The best marital counseling you have received so far. So if there are hiccups at home, travel more.
all right, so but Imam, if I could just press a little bit further.
Sure.
Some of the things that we hear, and maybe they're overblown and maybe they're not accurate, but we hear that organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and even ISIS to a certain degree are funded and supported by Muslims worldwide. So is there a movement within the Islamic world, and perhaps even in North America? There was a mosque, if memory serves me correctly, from Texas that was the major funder of Hamas for many years.
Which mosque do you remember?
I don't remember the name. But
And the terrorists get
no,
paid
one
for
second, please, nothing from the floor. So that's the question, is that how do you explain, we're still experiencing that sense of disconnect.
Sure.
And if I could just ask you to elaborate on that point.
Please, absolutely. Who these evil people are and what produces them is the fundamental question that we should reflect on. What produces evil organizations, evil places like Hezbollah, Hamas, as you mentioned, ISIS and Al-Qaeda? Is it the theology of Islam? Is it the certain interpretation of the Quran? Is it the religion of Islam producing these crazies? In their caves, somehow they are reading the Quran and misunderstanding this reality. Or, of course, their evil theology has its roots in the Islamic theology. They claim they are acting in the name of Islam. But as religious violence in other traditions shows, religion is not the only factor. Religion itself doesn't become evil and a source of destruction like what you see in the Islamic extremism. Usually religion becomes evil when it's merged and married to certain economic, social, political, historical, and cultural realities. It comes from a mix. Otherwise, theology itself, religion itself, it doesn't produce this cancer. It's a combination of many things, including religion. So it is wrong to say this terrorism, this jihadist, Islamist extremism that you see, it is absolutely wrong. There are so many naive Muslims saying this. It has nothing to do with Islam. It has something to do with Islam. These people are quoting hadith and ayah. They are distorting it, perverting it, but they make a claim. So you cannot say it has nothing to do with Muslims. And you cannot say these people are not Muslim either. As much as they disgust me, as much as they turn my stomach upside down, these organizations and people, I cannot say they are not Muslim. I cannot disown them. But it's not the only tradition of Islam and the religion of Islam. It is the certain political, cultural, economic, social. Economic part is the key, Rabbi Daniel. Economic part. If you come to Duke University, there's a very painful picture on the wall of my office I will show you. In Afghanistan, a Taliban terrorist holding a very sophisticated bazooka, waiting for two American army trucks to come. It's a newspaper article. He actually fires the weapon and kills 11 American soldiers. This is around 2008, 2009. But the picture is taken from so close that you can read what's written on that weapon. Guess what does it say?
Made in the United States.
Made in Huntsville, Alabama. Made in Huntsville, Alabama. A weapon produced made in Huntsville, Alabama. Until I saw that picture, I thought the holiest of the holy state in America was Alabama. You know why? Because it has God's name in it. Allah. But I said no state producing that much destruction and weapon can be holy. So I think it is really beyond that simplistic reductionist moment that somehow these terrorist organizations are solely produced on the theological ground and it's supported, it is fed, it turned into this kind of monster only through believing, practicing Muslim here and there. Those allegations might be correct. Like if you go to CIAfacts.com, please do go. It's the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States government. There are very specific statistics about how many terrorist organizations are out there, approximately how many terrorists are there, what is their budget, and what are their funding resources are coming from, and compare that number to 1.6 billion people. How much of this is a very common epidemic of a very general, very spread common disease? How much of it is a fringe, but incredible? Even one is more. Even one is too much.
Good. So that, if I could use that as a segue. And you were touching on this idea about many times people are motivated not only by religious motivations, but socioeconomic, and cultural. Obviously, the Middle Eastern culture is different from a Western culture. But here's the question. Is there something inherent within the Islamic faith that gives rise, or allows at least for, violence in the name of religion? Now we know that in every religion you have violence being justified in the name of faith. But it seems like today, Jews have gotten over that for the most part.
Bite your tongue.
Okay. Christians seem to have gotten over that for the most part. In other words, there seems to be an understanding, at least by the mainstream theologian world, that violence is never a justifiable means of acting on behalf of a faith. But yet we hear this term jihad many, many times used as a justification for violence, as a justification for excluding members of society who are deemed to be either dhimma because they're not Muslim, or homosexuals, gays, because they're not living according to the Islamic law.
Or Muslims, those who don't practice Islam.
Or non-practicing Muslims and so forth. And we are hearing and we're seeing on media acts of violence perpetrated against these people, not in this country mostly, although there are honor killings that take place even in the United States and Canada. So can you address that, the presence of violence that seems to be more in Islam than in the other Western faiths?
If you think Islam is the name of a religion, Islam is only what Quran says and what the text says and scripture says, there's a different kind of answer to this question. But if you consider Islam is not the name of a religion. It's the name of a civilization. Islam is what Muslims do. To me, Judaism is the name of a civilization. Judaism is what Jews do. Christianity is what Christians do. And you are absolutely right. If you take this as a definition of Islam, what some Muslims end up doing is horrific. What some Muslims end up doing in terms of violence, in terms of discriminating women in certain parts of the world. I'm not even going to bother whether how prevalent, how those facts and numbers are true, but there's an ugly reality ahead of us. So I don't think there is innately, inherently, nothing in any religion that makes that religion more peaceful or more violent. But there is absolutely something innately, inherently within a humanity. It's something innate. Violence is not a religious business, it's a human business. So when individually human beings and collectively societies and civilizations, when they are healthy, when a civilization, I hope my definition of civilization is a society with its economy, with its culture, with its history, with its democratic institutions, with its governmental organizations, with its civic society. That's what I mean by civilization. So when civilization is healthy, they reveal the best of every part of their civilization, including their religion. But when the civilization is unhealthy, like many of the Muslim majority world, what you are seeing in the Muslim world is almost like a modern dark age. You saw what the dark ages of Christianity did to Judaism. In many ways, the Muslim civilization is experiencing a total collapse at the end of the 19th, early 20th century by internal problems and the European colonial invasion. Muslim civilizations have collapsed. So therefore, what the episodes that you are saying, I am not challenging. Still, they are not overwhelming majority. They are small, but even one is enough. Those evil episodes of people revealing the worst of their religion. I hope Judaism, inshallah, Bezrat Hashem, will never experience such a thing. Because Judaism, Allah saved Judaism, being a minority religion for a very long time, you didn't exercise power. You didn't necessarily were in a position to rule over other ethnic and religious minorities. But as you have seen in the last 60, 70 years, how difficult that business is in the Middle East. So the Muslim civilization, the answer is, when Muslim civilizations recover its civilizational health, when they become functional democracies, you will see they reveal the best of themselves, including their religion. Also, if you look at, for example, the random violence, there are some misleading facts in the spirit of the question. In what country is the murder is the highest in the world? Does anybody know?
The U.S.
No. The U.S. is almost there with the gun violence. But Venezuela and Honduras. Venezuela and Honduras. The gun violence, like killing and murder. No Muslims there. No Muslims there. So why? It's not because of their form of Catholicism or Christianity. It's because that society is crippling in deeply broken economies, social institutions, their democracy, etc. I think the answer is in the humanity, not in the theology. So as the problem as well.
Okay, I'm making an effort to sort of do a little bit of a dance between theology and practice,
Sure.
because I personally am of the belief that any religion, regardless of what is contained in its holy texts, is capable of reforming whatever parts of that text are problematic, and moving past it. So I don't accept the arguments of those who say, well, look at surah this and hadith that, and it'll be an example of how the violence that's inherent in Islam, because you can always reinterpret and refocus, but the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. What about this issue of dhimma? If a Jew were to want to live, and we're even seeing this today in the Middle East, and eventually we're going to have to get to that elephant in the room.
Does anybody know the term dhimmi or dhimma?
No.
It's a sociological, not religious. It's very important. It's a sociological and civic term created by
Can you say it again?
dhimmi, D-H-I-M-I. It's a reflection of a hierarchical society for many centuries in the Muslim world, where egalitarian 21st century societies didn't exist back then. The Muslim majority societies, in their creation of multiculturalism, they came up with a hierarchical system, where Muslim majority was here, Jews were here, Christians were here, and everybody else in that sense. That's the way those societies in that historical context functioned. Is that clear? It was a status given to them. How many of you have been to Istanbul, where I grew up? Have you visited the Jewish Museum in Karaköy area? In the 500-year anniversary of the Jews coming from Spain, I hope what I will say will come out respectfully. I am not making false equations. I am not glorifying the dhimmi system. But I think we have an ethical moral responsibility when we go back and analyze any period of history. We have a responsibility to analyze that history in its own historical context, not with the 21st century cultural baggage. You cannot go from Canadian society, aspire to be egalitarian, feminist, progressive, inclusive, and judge 12th century, 13th century, this society and that society. In that context, those Jewish refugees on the ships from Spain into Ottoman Empire, I am sure they were coming to a hierarchical society. They were coming to a place where they were going to be second-class citizens. They knew this. But at the same time, where they were running away from, they didn't even have that category.
It's even worse.
They didn't have a category. Imagine even converting was not an option. All those Jews and Muslims converted to Catholicism. 60 years later, they were all butchered. And as you have seen in the Holocaust, in the shameful Holocaust, Hitler almost did his own DNA test. Even if one grandparent is Jewish, even if you convert to Christianity, it didn't matter. Forget about second-class citizen. Like, there was no option for you other than to be just destroyed and wiped out and disappear. In one way, what I am begging is, in that historical context, what worked is not entirely a horrible thing. So that there were fuller side of the glass. But in the 21st century, if I don't say what they came up with and worked relatively better is not our model. Our religious, ethical, moral imagination should not end there. In the 21st century, if we are looking for societies both in the Middle East, Muslim majority societies, as well as here in the United States. We should aspire to, because there is nothing religious about the dhimmi system. It's not 5 times praying, it's not fasting in the Ramadan, it's not God's oneness, it's not unmutable part of the tradition. What we should aspire, it's
No,
part of,
it isn't part of your dogma.
yeah, it's not part of my creed.
Right.
It's not part of, even if you kill me, I will not say God is not one. I will die and say God is one. But that's part of the tradition. It changed over time. Even the dhimmi system has changed and evolved over time.
Right.
What we should be aspired is absolutely get away with this hierarchical system. And if you are going to deliver a gift to God in the 21st century, including the United States, this is one of the challenges which you can help to your Muslim brothers and sisters. Many Muslims, they look at the history of the Jewish-Muslim relations and they say, oh, we had no problem with Judaism. They had their synagogues, they had their halakhic courts, they had their rabbis. We produced Halevi, we produced Rambam and Maimonides. But they don't realize they are naively giving voice to that nostalgic hierarchical system that the Jewish community moved on a long time ago.
So does, there may be some level of elitism in the Jewish community. Do you find that same sense of elitism in the Muslim community? People
Elitism in what sense?
No, well, people quote this verse, that Christians and Jews are pigs and monkeys. And is that a pervasive attitude? Is there a certain racism that exists in the Muslim community?
Absolutely. You see, all our religions have their own version of chosenness. Judaism has their own chosenness, Christianity, and there are certain episodes and periods in our history that you can take that chosenness, God somehow picked us, we are the most favorable people, and you can take it to the extreme and become superstitious, and you can be racist towards other people. But this needs to be tamed, absolutely. But if you look at the mainstream, last 1400 years, the direction and projection, what ended up overwhelming majority of Muslims was absolutely accommodating and improving the status of religious and ethnic minorities. But we cannot stop that, that's what I'm saying. We have to go even beyond and improve it and aim for an egalitarian system.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. By the way, I am reading your questions. I'm trying to get through them. It's a little bit hard for me to read them while the Imam is speaking, but I'm incorporating a lot of your questions in my comments, so please rest assured.
I want to correct one thing. There is nothing in the Quran called Jews pigs and monkeys. Absolutely nothing. There is one verse when God is talking about one particular Jewish community who didn't observe Shabbat and who rebelled against God, and God turned them into pigs and monkeys. It's a very specific story of a previous nation. It's not even a historical document. It is the language of the early 7th century about what does not obeying halakha, what does obeying the religious ruling, not observing Shabbat. I remember reading that verse with a Chabad rabbi. And a Chabad rabbi read the verse and saying, yeah, I can use this as a teaching material. I can use this as a teaching material. What God is condemning is a violation of the halakhic ruling or observance of the Shabbat on any particular context. It's not even a prescriptive. It's a description of, like, very much similar to many of the biblical episodes of God's wrath and anger towards different episodes of the children of Israel. If you take that as anti-Semitic, I mean, Hebrew Bible is one of the most strong in that sentiment.
Right, there's a lot of self-criticism there.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you another question having to do with what, impinging a little bit on the political scene in the Middle East. There seems to be something within it's either doctrinal or cultural, you'll have to explain this to us. There seems to be an Islamic desire for land conquest, and historically lands that had been previously conquered by a caliphate or by a Muslim leader,
Darul Harb, Darul Islam.
right, have to be preserved and regained if they were lost or ceded to a non-Muslim entity. So that's one of the reasons why we're seeing, let's say, for example, in Egypt, the Christian Copts are a persecuted minority. because many, I'm not saying it's all of the population, but many believe that Christians should not be in a Muslim country. There is even a belief now when we're talking about peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians, there's a belief that the settlements are an obstacle to peace, but because Palestinians have this ambition for every single square inch that's going to be part of what they believe will be the future Palestine to be completely Judenrein, to be completely devoid of Jews. And the question is that, and this is really one of what we perceive one of the obstacles to peace is, Israel has 20% Arab population. Can Palestinians as Muslims live with a minority of their population being of a different faith?
The short answer is absolutely yes, but in the context of barbarism and the killing and destruction, it's hard to believe that's the case. If it was in the DNA of Islam, if it's in the core teachings of Islam that non-Muslims cannot live in the Muslim land, the kind of Jewish history within the Muslim world which produced Halavi and Maimonides could never happen. It is true what's going on in Egypt, in Iraq, in Syria, destruction of these ancient Christian and Jewish communities. As we see and as our heart believes the kind of barbarism destroying them today, we should also ask ourselves, how did they survive? How did they survive 1500 years? Islam was in Spain for 800 years. 10 years after Inquisition, nothing left. Nothing left. Islam was in Eastern Europe. Bulgaria was 60% Muslim in 1917. Nothing left. Like if it was in the calling, essential fulfillment of Islam that you kill and destroy anybody and everybody who's not Muslim, like none of this should have. We had every opportunity, every power, every means, and it was perfectly fine back then. There was no Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, like nobody was watching. Islam ruled India for 800 years, and today in India you have 1.2 billion Hindus. Like forget about only Christians and Jews who are people of the book who are monotheistic. Even a polytheistic world, Islam ruled Southeast Asia for 600 years, and still overwhelming majority of the Buddhists. So there is a much longer history, proves that what we are facing or going through today is an anomaly. It's abnormal. It's in violence and contradiction of the overall tradition of Islam.
How do we fix it?
Look, I have been going to Palestine and West Bank for the last 20 years. I see this even in my own eyes. Jenin produced largest number of suicide bombers. Jenin refugee camp produced more suicide bombers than anybody else in the Middle East. And I have seen what death, destruction, violence, horrible teaching of imams can do. How Islam can turn into something really ugly in the context of conflict and war. But if you go to Jenin today, a combination of the particular IDF commanders' mercy and compassion, and the wise leadership of some of the local elders for the last 5-6 years, I'm not idealizing. They have improved the life of people on that particular part of the West Bank. And it's amazing. It's amazing how much the violence, how much even the kind of violent protests have declined significantly. You see this. So that should be the direction that we should be going. Everybody should play their own role to say, if the Muslim civilization society is producing these terrorism or violence, if these people function in a healthy way, most of the problems will be, not entirely, but most of them will be recovery.
Okay. Let me follow up. I'm going to get back to Israel in a minute. But you are a chaplain at Duke University. You're the Islamic
Yes.
Chaplain at Duke. You've been there for 10 years. And this is a Methodist university. You've had a tremendous impact on campus. One of the things that's a really hot issue for our university students is the whole BDS movement. Please enlighten us. What is your position on the BDS movement? Are you supportive of it? Are you anti-BDS? Tell us the way you view what's going on.
Thank you. Who doesn't know what BDS is? Good, it's an informed society. I am neither against BDS nor pro-BDS. My entire life I have been advocate of engagement, dialogue. I don't believe in anything ends a conversation. I believe in everything starts a conversation. There is no one that I wouldn't talk to. That's why I'm taking a group of Muslim leaders to Israel in a Zionist Israeli organization, we study Judaism, Zionism, and Israel from the Jews themselves. We don't have to agree, but trying to understand this.
Okay, did everyone hear that? I want to make sure that everyone understands what Imam Antepli is involved with. The Shalom Hartman Institute in Israel, at his own initiative, the Imam brings regularly a group of Muslim leaders to the Shalom Hartman Institute because he's interested in hearing the Jewish narrative on Israel. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And in this kind of educational engagement, if you can understand Islam and if you can hear Islam from Muslims themselves, if you can unlearn some of what you already learned, and that's, I shouldn't speak for you, I should speak for myself. It's my aim and hope. If we can understand the Jews in its own context, if we can hear Judaism, Zionism, and Israel from the people who identify, who see these realities as part of their own identity, I see a lot of transformation and a lot of horizons opening for many Muslims to understand Jewish community and the modern Jewish society, especially in North America, in a much healthier, much nuanced, much more comfortable way. But coming to BDS, I will say a few paradoxical points. I will combine with my Turkish accent, I hope you will understand. I am not a sweetheart of BDS. If you Google my name and BDS, you will see I am in the target of BDS movement. How many petitions because of the work that I do. I go to Israel and engage with a Zionist Israeli organization there that is breaking an academic and cultural BDS. That's why the number of attacks, number of social media lynching campaigns against me, number of death threats. FBI camped in front of my house for weeks when there were some legitimate death threats because of the work that I do. But despite all of this, I am not doing anything to undermine anybody's business, including BDS. And that's not my personality, and that's not my work. BDS is a problem, and within the BDS there are problematic voices. Modern anti-Semitism often hides behind anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism. Many people, they spray and vomit anti-Semitism and hate as if they are criticizing the policies of the State of Israel. Sometimes naively, sometimes intentionally and deliberately. There are so many, especially in my community, they don't know. They don't know what is criticizing the State of Israel and what is anti-Semitism. And without knowing innocently, they cross that line, regretfully. But unfortunately, that ultra-sensitivity, equating any criticism to the State of Israel as anti-Semitism from the Jewish side is not healthy. Unfortunately, that inability to create a space between what is criticizing a secular nation-state policy and what is anti-Semitism. If there is no space, if there is no room for legitimate criticism to certain policies of a secular nation-state, that doesn't help us either.
Well, I think the problem that a lot of us in the community have is the inconsistency to excessively emphasize the, let's say, perhaps the unfair policies of Israel versus the onerous policies of Syria, of Iran, or Egypt. In other words, it seems like Israel's being singled out for doing bad things to the Palestinians. But a country like Jordan, which truly is an apartheid country, when you think about the way they treat their Palestinian population, no one hears about Jordan. No one hears about the Syrian genocide that's going on. How come there's no BDS against Syria today on campus?
In principle, I agree the soul of your cry. That's absolutely. That's what many people in that anti-Israeli camp needs to understand. If you are not morally consistent, even in your legitimate criticism of the human rights violation that Israel is committing, if you don't give the similar reaction, then it's saying even worse, human rights violations are, like for example Gaza, what's going on there? If you look what Egyptian government's blockade is doing, what Egyptian government right now, because they are also in conflict with Hamas, and if you are not giving the same reaction to Egyptian government as you are giving, even if it is legitimate criticism, that is hate. That means you swallow hate. That means you are morally inconsistent, and therefore you lose your moral. But that requires a little bit of education. That requires a little bit of growing to understand that somehow you single out one sin or one sinner over anybody and everybody else. But coming back to BDS, there are certain problematic voices within the BDS movement. But unfortunately, I find most of the exaggerated anxiety and reaction to BDS on the part of the Jewish community somewhat exaggerated. And it's not helping. That Jewish reaction, knee-jerk reaction to BDS, as if a new Haman is risen, as if a new anti-Semitic movement coming to destroy, that existential threat, I don't know. It comes across as, because it doesn't, A, justify the size or the problem. Unfortunately, it makes things worse. Like I ask my Jewish colleagues and friends, even in the most politically active campus, how many students are involved in BDS? Like UC Berkeley, like UCLA, where you came from. 2 dozen, 3 dozen, not more. We lose.
I think part of the problem is that we're hearing from a lot of university students from across North America that they're feeling increasingly uncomfortable. That if you try to set up a pro-Israel table, you'll be scorned. You'll face, right, really verbal assault, insults, marginalization, ostracization, and it's becoming, there doesn't seem to be that sense of tolerance of two different sides, and that's all represented by the BDS
I
movement.
invite everybody to verify those informations. I invite everybody to really verify if that's the case. I am sure those things are happening, and it's committed by a small number of people, but unfortunately, I believe there is an unjustified reaction to the problem. And it's really making things worse, unfortunately. It's giving a lot more attention, a lot more oxygen, because many people in that camp, they are measuring their success by the amount of Jewish cry that they create.
All right, so let me just take a poll. How many of you are university students, or within the last year or so? Okay.
And how many of you met like overt
What, anti-Semitism?
overt anti-Semitism, overt anti-Israeli intimidation?
I didn't, but my son did.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying the problem doesn't exist. But I'm saying there is an imbalance amount of reaction that it's receiving and the actual crime. Secondly, many of my brothers and sisters in the Jewish community, they think BDS is entirely, or pro-Palestinian BDS camp is entirely a Muslim thing. And this is Jews versus Muslim. That's absolutely not true. Significant number of financial support to BDS. Many of the foot soldiers are Jews. There are significant, on my campus, 70% of the BDS students are Jewish students. And
That's what we call Yiddish Nachas in Arabic.
And the faculty advisor is an Israeli citizen. And I have credibility in the both communities. I have credibility and respect from the both communities. When things become tense, they invite me. And always, this BDS conversation on my campus, it turns into an intra-Jewish shouting match. One Jew on one side is shouting the other Jew, and we Muslims, including Palestinians, we become like a passive spectators. It's really not as black, and it's not as horrifying and big. By making it much bigger than what it is making problem worse. And secondly, it's not a block and monolithic Muslim community ganging and teaming up against the Jewish community. The Jewish, and regretfully, the Jewish involvement within the BDS movement or some sort of anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli movement, it's not limited to BDS. It is undermining Muslims' ability to try to understand Israel, Zionism in a little bit more nuanced way. Unfortunately, they become validators of the existing anti-Semitism or stereotypes within the Muslim community.
Okay. I want to get closer to the elephant in the room now, if that's okay. Let's talk a little bit about Israel. Let's talk about the Palestinians. I know that it's very difficult to find pro-Israel positions within the Islamic community. And that's probably one of the biggest things that divides our community. Many Jews believe that the Palestinian cause is really more propaganda than substance, that if there was really a desire to have a country for the Palestinians, pressure from all of the Islamic and Arabic countries by now would have created an Palestinian country by now. And what I mean by that is that I know that there's a narrative, and perhaps you subscribe to the narrative, that Israel is conducting an occupation. Most of the people in this audience do not view this as an occupation. We are all very, very upset that Palestinians are suffering in the world today. There is no human being that can look at a picture of a Palestinian baby that's been killed or a Syrian baby that's been killed and say, this doesn't mean anything to me, who cares? No one in this room, I hope I speak for everyone in this room when I say that a human life, a human being is a human being. And Jewish blood is precious as much as non-Jewish blood is precious to all of us. The problem that we have is that many times we feel that we are blamed for all of the suffering of the Palestinians, when in reality, the Palestinian leadership is primarily responsible for the suffering of the Palestinians. Look at the refugee camps that still exist since 1948. What country, besides Palestine, allows its citizens to live in refugee camps 3 and 4 generations after five generations after attaining refugee status? It's like a propaganda prop to say to the world, look, we're poor Palestinians. 800,000 Jews were exiled from Arabic countries in 1948. What happened? They all came to Israel. No one's living in refugee camps. They were absorbed, they started lives, they came with nothing, and they were supported by fellow Jews, and we built, and we built, and we have an amazing country today. We wish that for the Palestinians. We want the Palestinians to have their own national destiny. But it seems like it's the Arabic world primarily that is holding them back. It's not Israel. And I'd like you to respond to that.
Absolutely. You see, I hear the Muslim version of the story. There is an almost identical self-justifying facts and basically glorifying, and you're not doing that, but justifying their own stuff and putting the blame on the other side. And many of it true, what you are saying. I work in refugee camps. I have an interesting summer in my life. I'm one of the very few people. I spent 3 weeks in Jerusalem teaching Islam as I learned Judaism, Zionism with the American Muslims that I bring from the Shalom Hartman, but I also teach Islam to Israeli bureaucrats and IDF soldiers because they never have access to that kind of language. The remaining 6 weeks of my summer, I work in the refugee camps in Lebanon. It's one of the worst. Like, you wouldn't even allow insects to live in those refugee camps. It's shameful in the 21st century for human beings, for children to be raised or live in that kind of situation. And it's very, very clear, you're absolutely right. Israel or the creation of the state of Israel might have caused this problem. But sustaining this problem is in the failure of the Arab leaders, Lebanese leaders, Palestinian leaders, primarily the Palestinian leadership. It's very, especially in Arafat. He kept Palestinian women bleeding to use this as a bargaining chip. He made sure Palestinian suffering will be negotiation material.
There was a famous saying that we used to have in the 90s. Arafat never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. But at the same time, so I am not disagreeing. There's so much truth in what you say. But in terms of what to do, many of us in my camp, pro-Palestinian camp, in the Muslim community, by and large, overwhelming majority of us are in that camp. And many of us unfortunately turn this conflict into essentially a fight between good and evil. This is essentially between good and evil, and my side is good and the other side is evil. My side did everything they can to achieve the peace. Other side, even though they had a choice to choose between war, death, and destruction, and the peace, for some reason they choose death and destruction and violence. But I categorically reject, even in my camp, it doesn't make me popular, to say I can't, when they make those similar claims to pro-Israeli camp. Any human being, any religious community, any tradition, any Palestinian mother or Israeli mother, when they have an equal chance between peace and war, they choose war. Like, this is so against to my common sense, to my belief in the goodness of humanity of any faith background. This is not essentially a fight conflict between good and evil, and neither one of our side is completely innocent and good, and did everything they can to achieve the peace. nor the other side is essentially complete evil, and for no reason they are bloodthirsty, barbaric people. They choose death and destruction. In terms of what we can do in the Middle East, and I've been going there working in the refugee camp for the last 20 years. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I knew what could be done. Today, I don't know. Things have gone consistently wrong. Things are very, very complicated there. But here in North America, one of my favorite Psalms is Psalms 95 or 98, Shiru Adonai Shir Chadash. God says to David, sing me some new songs. My own midrash, Muslim midrash, that the singing new songs to God, glorifying God in a different tune or new tune is also common Muslim, especially in the mystical tradition, common concept. My own midrash, why God is saying to David, God is not bored with the old songs, but in a way God's saying to David, some of the old songs, some of the same talking points, some of the same self-referencing facts that you keep singing is not helpful anymore. It's not. Like, if you believe me that this is unacceptable, untenable, where we are, part of it is what we have been doing so far, the things that we've been saying so far, the songs that we've been saying so, the talking points that we've been repeating to ourselves for so far has contributed to where we are. And one of the greatest rabbis of the 20th century, Albert Einstein, says, if you keep doing same things over and over and expecting a same result or different result, that means you're insane. Our ability to expect a different result requires us to sing some new songs.
Okay, so what should those new songs be?
That new songs here in North America, these new songs are not possible in the Middle East. It's not possible. People are killing each other. It's not possible in France. In France, Jews and Muslims are not logging arms again, Ozeh Shalom. They are not singing Ozeh Shalom Bimrama. But here in America, it's possible. That's why I, with a sense of urgency, that I am begging Canadian Jews and Muslims to take a step back. Things have gone so wrong. The fact that Imam's visit to a synagogue, a shul, is creating anxiety, if you think about it, it's pathetic. It should be the most ordinary thing ever. A member of a faith community, a clergy, visiting another faith community. It should be the most innocent, loving, caring. The fact that it's creating an ouch, it's creating an anxiety, it's creating loyalty questions, is telling you the same thing happened. I will tell you how bad the situation is. I was invited to a church a couple of years ago to give a confirmation class talk on a Saturday morning. I gave my talk. I have a few more hours to spend in that city before my flight, and I saw this beautiful synagogue, beautiful, with a Muslim-looking dome, and then the sign says, Shabbat services at this time, community is at this time, and the sign ends, everybody is welcome. The problem with religious people like us, we take everything literally. Everybody is welcome. I said, oh my God, here's an opportunity. How often they see imams after they daven in their synagogue. So I walked in, put a name tag Abdullah, and then walk and introduce myself to the rabbi. Hello, my name is Imam Abdullah Antepli. I was in the neighborhood. I saw your sign. I just wanted to come and daven with you, and I wanted to something in my regular shmuzi. I want to be part of this community. Way. 5 minutes later, 3 policemen asking my ID. Several members of the shul. They saw my name, they heard my thick accent, they looked, my Middle Eastern look. Only thing they could imagine, if an imam or a Muslim is in the house, only thing he's there, they confessedly said, we thought you were going to blow up the building, or you were going to be here. It's insane, it's pathetic. This doesn't make Hashem smile, this makes Hashem shed tears. If that's the case, if we are in such a pathetic situation, here in America, my community's challenge is to try to see Judaism as religion, Jews as people, Israel as a state, Zionism as a form of nationalism in a different light. The way we have seen it so far, the way we understood so far, especially when it comes to Zionism and Israel, unfortunately, most of my community's experience or understanding, source of information about the creation of the state of Israel, this is a reality born out of Auschwitz. This is a reality born out of European crisis. It's the latest wave of Judeo-Christian European colonialism and land grabbing. My community rarely heard about the Israel and Zionism born out of Sinai. That biblical longing, that religious language, that religious attachment. Many of my people, when they talk about Palestinian suffering, which is a real suffering, it's real, they don't think this is a political issue. They call for justice for Palestinians because they feel this is a religious issue. But when they hear Jews talking about Israel and Palestine, they think it's a political issue. It took years of growing for me to understand that Israel is not only a secular nation state. It's not. It has endowed some sacred value for many Jews all around the world. It has a connection to their Jewish identity. It's more than that. That biblical, that historical, that religious imagination, that connection, it's not, that religious ticket has never been presented to us, and we need your help in that.
So we don't really understand each other. It's been a long time that we haven't understood each other.
Absolutely, and your communities in North America challenges if you continue to define Islam through terrorism. If the only prism in which, if the only window that you try to understand 1.6 billion people and the 1400 years of history through the lenses of Hamas, through the window of Hezbollah, all these evil organizations, if you confine and shrink the entire realities around Islam, especially if you treat your fellow Canadian citizens, those who are Muslim, as somehow the extension of that ugly reality and their existence as a source of threat, we will never be able to go. Things will only go worse. If we continue to play this zero-sum game with one another, unfortunately, we will turn Canada and America like what France is now, what Belgium is now, what some other countries where Jewish-Muslim relations are unthinkable, unfortunately. We have a moral obligation before it's too late, before our communities further get polarized, before we keep importing enough despair, polarization, division from Middle East to Canada and the United States. When things are still possible, I really hope we will come to a sense and try to understand the Jewish community in its own context, will bring nuance without compromising anything about our loyalties. But the toxicity of where we are, the kind of source of information that we fed ourselves as Muslims about Judaism, Zionism, and Israel, in many ways, the word Zionism makes the emotional impact to many Muslims like the Jihad makes to you.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to a mosque or a Muslim airport and say Zionist or Zionism, it's as if going to an American Canadian airport and screaming Jihad. It makes that impact. Imagine.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to challenge the sentiment because I believe the sentiment to be true. What I would like to do is recognize Imam Ibrahim and Mohammed are here in the audience. And what I'm hearing from the Imam Abdullah is that something has to change within our own community. And I was wondering if I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you would just stand up for a second. And if you want to come up, please, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if either of you or both of you would like to come up and for and if you could just offer to us your suggestion as to what you think needs to change or what you think could change to make things better for our communities.
Let's get a few more chairs on the podium.
Yeah.
What could be different in Canada between our communities? Okay.
Thank you for asking me to come
Introduce
here.
yourself.
My name is Ibrahim Hindi. I'm the Imam at a mosque in Mississauga. I've had the great pleasure of getting to know Imam Abdullah recently, and he has connected me with Rabbi Daniel. Sure, absolutely.
Closer to the microphone.
I've had the great opportunity recently to meet Imam Abdullah, and he's connected me with so many people in the Jewish community, with Rabbi John Moskowitz and now Rabbi Daniel as well. And, a lot of, I think what's happening today is incredibly important. that two people can sit down and really speak their own truths and speak about what they see in the world, and having that opportunity to see the perspective of someone else. I'm sitting there and I'm learning so much from the perception of how BDS is understood in your community versus my community. And just having that ability to see someone else's perspective is so powerful. I think it's so true that right now the world in general, we're living in silos. And you're receiving information on your Twitter feed, on your Facebook page, through your friends, through the news sources that you seek that are completely different than the information that I'm seeing. And it's shaping our perceptions in ways that's driving us apart, driving us completely apart. And the problem is we're here in this country and we have to be neighbors to each other. And that means we have to have a sense of compassion to each other. And it does not mean we're going to agree on a lot of things, but it means that we have to sit down and have uncomfortable conversations. Personally, recently I've received, death threats. Me and Abdullah have that in common. But I've received it from some of the far-right groups that have been rising, and a lot of the Islamophobia that's in the community right now, that's in society right now, and it's also given rise to a lot of anti-Semitism. And it was difficult for me. I have 3 young children. I have a police car parked outside of my house most of the days, and thank you, Bernie Farber, for helping put that together. But to have that protection, and my kids are seeing that every day because of the climate that we're living in, and that's not right. And I was speaking to Rabbi Daniel before, and we were talking about some of the expressions of hate sometimes in our own community. And we were talking about how recently there was an Imam who said, was praying against the Jews, and that got into the news and things like that. And I said, it's interesting because for me, I hear about something like that and I think, this is just an idiot, really. This is just, and it's a nuisance, right? Sorry. When I hear about something like that, I think it's just a nuisance, and this is just a random idiot, and I'm just upset that these mosques are not doing proper jobs, vetting the person who's leading the prayers and things like that. But then I realized as we were sitting and talking that it's causing real pain to the rabbi and to your community, and I think we have this all of us have, myself included, we have this perception that when someone in our community does something that is rotten, we kind of dismiss it and we think this is a person on the fringes, and we don't recognize the amount of pain that person is causing. So all of us have to take a lot more ownership over the problems in our community, and the only way we can do that is to build trust with each other and open these lines of communication.
I'm not much of a public speaker, so forgive me if I go on for too long, but plus these guys are professional speakers, so, and I'm not really dressed for this.
Ouch.
I think for me, the reason why I'm actually here is because January 29th really affected me. So I do a lot of, and please, if you're having pictures of me, don't post them online. I'm very shy. I don't like people seeing me.
Could you explain January 29th?
So January 29th is when Quebec City, there was a gunman that walked into a mosque and killed 6 people. So typically what I do in the Muslim community is I respond on first response, so on communication side. So whenever there's like a terrorist attack, or when I think you asked the question, where are the condemnations? I write those condemnations. So I know if there's Brussels, or if there's, I can go find them on my phone for you right now. If you go to the National Council of Canadian Muslims, you'll find every single one of those condemnations. It changed for me. That day really changed for me because I got the news around 9 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock we had a bit of a conference call from leaders across the country to say, Mohammed, go and fly up to Quebec first thing in the morning. So I caught the first flight, and one of the first people I met when I got there was a woman who was the Imam's wife and her 7-year-old daughter. And I asked him what happened, and she said, this is the 7-year-old daughter. She said, I saw a man come in, and shoot my father in the back. And then when the gunman walked in, the men saw what happened to what was happening, and immediately they started jumping on top of her. And then there's another guy who was one of the first Muslims that came to Quebec. He saw what happened. He started running into the gunman. He got shot 7 times, and then he was killed. His name was Izzaldin Sufyan. He was a store owner. He was a butcher. He's one of those butchers that, you weigh your meat, and then he goes back and adds some more, and then he wraps it up and gives it to you. That's the kind of guy he was. The only reason she survived is because he ran out of bullets. And because he turned to her and they fired empty clips. And that's why she survived. The second person I met there was a 6-year-old kid who asked me if his dad's going to take him to soccer tonight. His dad had been shot 6 times. 2 through the leg, 1 in the arm, 1 in the stomach, shoulder, and through the neck. And he was in a coma for over a month. And I didn't know how to answer that. And what these experiences meant to me, I've been seeing Islamophobia rise to a point where, because I respond to all this stuff. I see it. I'm like the first guy that's in the scene that's dealing with the crap, right? Sorry for my language. And the temperature's got to come down. Everything's being nice. The death threat that he got was an image of 5 men being hung. And on that was a link to a website called CIJ News, Canada Israel Jewish News. That's the death threat that he got, right? When we talk about our crazies in our community, they're causing real pain. It's not just us, it's not just you. There's crazies all over the place. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not blaming, I'm not saying this is our fault or your fault. I'm just saying we gotta start talking because this temperature's gotta come down. Because right now, every time there's a Muslim that puts their head up, they get slapped down. And to be quite frank, I've, in my last 10 years of doing Muslim advocacy work, has been with the particular motivation to remain under the gaze of Jewish advocacy. Because many people within my community, just like what Abdullah was saying, we talk about BDS, right? BDS is the only form of showing solidarity to the Palestinian people within the Muslim community. There's no other way. There's no way of saying, I got your back, right? There's no way that people see it that way. Because, and that's become the litmus test of loyalty to the Palestinians. John just asked me, is Zionism the same as Jihad in our communities versus your communities? I'm like, yeah, it's essentially the same. That's the way you see it, and that's the way we see it. We might not agree with that, but what I'm saying is that there's a lot of political rhetoric that has caused a lot of friction and caused a lot of and the reason I'm here is because I want to hear you. I want to hear what your understandings are.
Mohammed, if I may, thank you for that very moving address. I wanted to ask you, because I know that you're very much involved with the political side of things. This recent bill that came up in Parliament, M103, which makes Islamophobia a crime, or I don't know if it's called a crime or something that is banned. I'm not sure what the language exactly is.
No, it was just saying that we got to explore the meaning of Islamophobia. Okay. That's what the motion asks for. It says that
it's a motion.
It's a motion. It's not a bill. It's not saying it's outlawing criticism to Islam. It's saying Islamophobia, which is a word we've chosen, as you've chosen anti-Semitism. We don't define anti-Semitism for you. We define Islamophobia as a word that hurts us. And that's the word that we've chosen. That's the word that our community expresses it. And 103 meant a really big deal, because just a couple of months ago there was a condemnation of anti-Semitism, right? we all agreed with it. Not one single person within the political class that I work with in the Muslim community disagreed with that. You know, whenever we write statements, we try to make sure we include anti-Semitism in there because I know it means something, right? And we got to be real about this stuff. And yeah, it was really hurtful, really hurtful to see such a backlash that was so visceral across this nation around what around M103. I have no interest in saying, you know, it came from this side or that side. I think every organization has their understandings of what they need to be, but like that was a motion that really meant a lot because it was the first time the Muslim community was saying, you know, we're really hurting. We would like Parliament to acknowledge that. This motion was that exclamation of acknowledgement.
Right, and I think that in principle, I think that you'll get a lot of sympathy from most of the Jewish community on it. I think, at least from what I've heard, this is not my area of knowledge, but from what I've heard from politicians, is that it wasn't worded precisely enough so that people felt comfortable. People felt it was too over-sweeping, and they felt it was going to shut down dialogue.
Yeah.
That was the issue that a lot of people
The
had.
motion actually asked for the Heritage Committee to define Islamophobia. So it never had a pre-defined understanding of what Islamophobia is. It actually takes it back to the Heritage Committee to do so.
Okay. All right. Let me open up some questions, if I may. Okay. And I'm glad that you're up here.
Now I got more support. Let's go.
It's three against one.
Can I add
No,
one
it's
thing?
not.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
About this
Ibrahim.
M103 issue, because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I know a lot of people are saying we want, you know, obviously in a secular, liberal democracy, people have to be able to criticize religion. We all understand that, but there's always a blurred line, and I would think that this community would understand that there's a blurred line between attacking a religion and attacking the people who follow the religion. I mean, you know, one of the things that when I was in university, actually I studied Judaism at the University of Toronto, and I studied the Holocaust in a lot of detail. Let me ask you an interesting question to think about. When the Nazis were attacking conceptions of Judaism, for example, they were saying, you know, the blood libel. For example, they were contriving protocols of Zion, and ascribing these beliefs to the Jewish people. Where they would say that they're not attacking the Jewish people, they're attacking the faith, but they've really just created these fictional beliefs and ascribed them to the Jewish people. I see things that are similar on the attacks against Muslims. People will contrive ideas of taqiyya and things like this, and they'll ascribe it to the Muslim faith and say, we're not attacking Muslims, we're attacking their faith, but they've contrived that belief to begin with. So you understand where there's these blurred lines, and so I understand, and I'm against outlawing people criticizing religion. I criticize, you know, the conceptions of religion in my own community, right? But there is that blurred line, and we have to all understand that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me just ask a couple of questions.
For those who are standing, there are empty chairs here.
Yes, please.
Please come and
some
join.
chairs, please. You're welcome.
It says-
Okay. Here's a question. There's a growing perception that Muslims do not integrate into Western countries and Western society at large. Evidence of this can be seen in many countries in Europe and some places in North America, where there are whole neighborhoods and towns with Muslims that do not work, speak the native language, or subscribe to basic tenets of Western values and laws. Democracy, rule of Western law, for example. Can you comment on why this may be? That's the end of the question.
I love that whoever asked this question, thank you for using the word perception, not a reality. Especially in North America, but including Europe. I'm from Turkey originally. I have 4 dozen first and second cousins all over Europe, France, Germany, Denmark, and Sweden. There are people who are absolutely justifies this perception. Less so in North America, more so in the United States. Just go on Friday to Ibrahim's mosque and look at the parking lot. And look at the quality of the cars. The BMWs and the Lexuses, and like to think that these people haven't integrated somehow, and somehow they still want to give up this and ride camels, is really, it's beyond tragedy. It's really beyond tragedy. In North America, Canadian Muslims and American Muslims, they really don't deserve this perception. There are thousands of miles between our perception and our reality. In America and in Canada, the Jewish and the Muslim woman are the second most educated faith minority other than the Jewish woman. Our level of education, income, our level of integration, suburban versus, if you look into our reality, actually we are a whole successful bunch, even though we are a much more recent immigrant community. In Europe, the issue is slightly different because it's a different demographic. Many Muslims who came to Canada and the United States, we came as graduate students, as engineers, as doctors, as lawyers, and our level of integration, our ability to integrate was incredibly successful. But people in Europe, like my cousins, they were skillless laborers. They came from the rural areas. Before living in any city in Turkey, they started living in Berlin, Munich, and Köln, and other places. But if you look really, I have like for teeny tiny minority living in the ghettos and refusing to learn German, French, and refusing to be integrated German life, it's really less than 10%. But if you look at the 90%, they are already integrated, but neither themselves feel like European, German, or French, nor they are accepted by the society. I think the relative success in North America is not entirely because of the Muslim demographics. It's also the difference in the context. It's here, my daughter, who's obsessed with John Adams, the second president of the United States. She thinks he's the best thing since Adam and Eve. Like this guy's really figured things out. She's studying this, and she was presenting John Adams in her high school. She's 16. I recorded 9 minutes of her presentation and sent it to my cousins in Germany. Her pride in being an American, her pride in being an American citizen, her pride in the founding fathers of this nation, as if we arrived before the Native Americans. There was nothing in her voice saying, I don't belong here, this is not my country. Her reverence to the flag, her reverence to the Constitution. But when I sent it to my German third generation, their parents were born in Germany, they said, this will never happen here. We will never feel German, French, the way your daughter, who is feeling as American, because the context will never accept us. Because being German is tied to, unlike being Canadian and being American, to a particular skin color and particular religion.
Okay, we're going to do the last question just because...
we just warmed up.
But could you just define, how do you define not integrating? Like, what is the test of that?
I was reading the question. I think the person, the reason I chose it is because it's a young person who's 22 years old, and I wanted to put out his perception. I think that, I don't know what the person was thinking. I know that sometimes you see images about what's going on in the UK and in France, where whole communities are sort of cordoning themselves off and really creating their own sense of society.
I think the problem is deeper. Many in Canada and the United States, they see my wife with a hijab and they think she's not integrated. She's a nurse at the veteran hospital serving American soldiers and veterans. Many people see that's why my community needs to be in conversation with you. You will understand. We want to integrate, but we want to hold on to certain tradition. We want to eat halal. We want to daven. We want to make sure our connection to our tradition, our God, our prayer life will not be compromised by integration. I will, if you allow me, when the Pew result about American Jews came, I think it was on Tuesday, Wednesday morning, there are 9 messages in my office at Duke University. Muslims all around the country are calling, basically horrified. They saw the level of assimilation. They saw the level of, quite honestly, deterioration of the tradition. They saw the level of interfaith marriage, the level of this and level of that. And they are horrified, calling me, saying, Imam Abdullah, you seem to know something about Jews and Judaism. Come and teach us so that we are not going to be like them. We are not going to arrive in that. Is this not integrating? I don't think so. This is what your community has been successfully negotiating.
Right.
This is not against integration. This is about holding something so dear as you exist in harmony with the rest of the society.
That's right. And there's always going to be a tension in any religious community about integration versus insulation. And I guess that's, every community has to find a happy medium. Right.
And the last thing, you go and verify, 80-90% of the Canadian Muslims and American Muslims, and I'm not exaggerating, and I can verify this, if you put us Muslims in the Jewish map, we are modern Orthodox. This is what we are. We are modern Orthodox Muslims.
Does that mean you talk during the service?
Oy vey. And the only community who will really understand us in our ability to integrate but not assimilate completely is you brothers and sisters. But it's the modern Orthodox community that we have the least relationship with.
And that's why the dialogue was so important tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Myriv is in 1 minute, just next door for those who would like to pray. And I'd like to thank our guests for being here tonight. It was so enlightening, so meaningful. And this is the beginning of the conversation.
Shiru Adonai Shir Chadash. Let's sing some new songs and let's sing it together, inshallah. Thank you very much.